Doctors and nurses of Reddit, what have been your "why didn't you come in sooner" moments? This happens all the time. People have a big stroke at home and can't move an entire side of the body. They wait several days thinking it's a flu or something. Nope, not the flu. Just a large clot in the brain that could have been reversed if you came in right away. Former medic here. Called to a patient who had cut their leg while chopping wood about a week prior and now it was really itchy. Old gentleman. Didn't drive. Lived alone. Got to his house. Unwrapped the ungodly swollen leg to find that he'd tried to superglue the wound closed and maggots had commenced to growing inside. The itching he was feeling was the writhing maggots under his skin. Guy came in with a dead leg. Waited until it turned black and then decided to head to the ER. They tried an angiogram to open up blood flow but it was way late for that. Guy had several clots in his lungs and legs. Undiagnosed atrial fibrillation. He couldn't believe we were going to amputate. Kept asking me what else I could do. Go back in time a week ago and come in. Kinda around when it turned blue. Once had an older lady call in wanting a prescription for pain meds because she was sure she had shingles. Said her neighbor had them and she was sure that's what it was. She hadn't been in for an exam in almost 2 years. So the doctor asked that she come in to be evaluated before a prescription could be given. She refused and called again the next day asking for a prescription. This went on all week. Her calling for pain meds. The doctor asking her to come in to be seen. She finally agreed to make an appointment. It wasn't shingles. It was a skin ulceration from advanced breast cancer. Imaging guy here. I have a million of these. I work with vascular patients and wounds. Had a guy whose foot was completely broken sideways at the ankle. He had it still wrapped from when he left the hospital. He would use the stumpy part to move around on his wheelchair and leave little blood sponge prints on the floor. Another guy with bad ankle and foot wounds decided to stop going to wound care. And was afraid to take the wraps off even after his foot started to stink. By the time I saw him his skin had kinda liquefied. Earlier on in my career I saw a guy with necrotizing wounds to both legs that had eaten to muscle in multiple places below the knee. I asked him how long they looked like that and he said about 2 years. Next time I saw him he was bilateral above knee amp. Stump wounds. Just stump wounds. Take care of your feet, people. If you're diabetic and can't feel the bumps and scrapes, please check your feet regularly. I've seen a few over the years, and they generally fall into the category of, if it's not diagnosed then I can't have it. Or, I didn't think it was that bad. As a medical student I remember an older lady that had a breast that was necrotic and falling off. It had been progressing over the last several years. But, if she didn't get diagnosed with breast cancer, then she couldn't have it. In the other category I've seen a few cases of Fournier's gangrene. Pretty much obese. Male diabetics that had a pimple, sore that started in the pubic region. By the time they come to the hospital it's a raging infection where the treatment is basically to cut away everything in the pubic groin region down to the muscle layer. That little sore didn't seem like much at first. Not a doctor, hospital staff. But my grandpa ended up passing away because he waited too long before going to the hospital. This was about 17 years ago. He was tending to one his mules when something spooked it and he got kicked in the gut. He was in a lot of pain. Could barely move due to the abdominal pain so decided to take it easy and lounge on the couch for a week. He refused to go to be taken to the hospital. Unfortunately, that mule kick ruptured an unknown tumor in his intestines. The doc said it was huge. Like volleyball size huge. And he may have survived if he came in sooner. By the time we got him to the hospital he had a severe case of gangrene. His leg needed to be amputated within a day of him being there. He passed away a week later. Years ago as a nursing assistant on an oncology floor we had a guy admitted because he had had an erection for several days and had lost the ability to pee. His bladder was close to bursting and his poor junk was, think microwaved hot dog, really bad. But none of that was as interesting as the fact that this guy had untreated skin cancer on his nose for several years that had over time become infected. Developed MRSA. And spread across his face. He had no nose. No cheek. And no eye on one side of his face. And was starting to lose his other eye. You could see part of his fucking skull. I don't know why he chose to leave it untreated and I have no idea how long it took to get that bad. But I will never ever forget the smell and texture of his rotting face. On the upside, we were eventually able to convince him to have reconstructive surgery. He ended up getting a skin graft that covered up his eye. nose and cheek. So, if you ever meet a very grumpy dude with nothing but a mouth and one eye, know that this is way better than the alternative. We once had a patient who went to emergency for abdominal pain and they discovered a fungating breast wound. Don't image search that. That she'd had for 2 years and hadn't gotten medical attention for. A biopsy and a PET scan later she was diagnosed with breast cancer with extensive liver, lung and bone mets. This was also in Australia, so it wasn't a money issue. Just sad. This has happened a few times. Actually. But I had a gal come in on Monday after being discharged from the hospital Friday after giving birth. So basically, we tell ladies to avoid intercourse until a doctor clears you. And well, her spouse kept insisting that Friday night she caved and let him go to town. He wound up tearing some stitches that were placed and bleeding like a stuck hog all weekend long. Came into our clinic. Blew in the lips and fingers. And her hemoglobin was 4. Normal should be 12 to 15. She didn't wanna be a bother. So she waited until she started feeling dizzy all the time. She got another trip to the hospital for transfusion and repair for that. But, like I said, this isn't the first time I've seen that. So for the love of God, if homeboy is begging for it after you just had a baby, maybe he needs a lesson in self-control and a bottle of moisturizer. I am a doctor, and while working in A&E we had an older chap, possibly in his 70s, who several days prior to presentation had a sudden onset severe chest pain and vomiting while loading the car with shopping. He ignored it and struggled home. The next day he started to lose the use of both legs, and by the time he came to hospital had been crawling around his house for several days because he thought it would get better. He had had a major cardiac event. Developed a clot which his heart had pumped out. It went down his body. Broke in half and blocked off the blood supply to both legs. He literally had dead legs. I don't know what ended up happening to him. But there was no way to save the legs, and I reckon the outcome was very poor. If not fatal. Edit, because there is a lot of USA assumption going on. This is in the UK where healthcare is free at point of access. So debt is not a contributing concern for our patients. Children's nurse here. My first week in pediatric ed we had a young girl. 6/7. Come in with a really swollen jaw face. Poor girl was unable to move her jaw without intense pain and hadn't been able to eat for several days. Turns out she had only just started cleaning her teeth for the first time ever and managed to develop several abscesses and rotten teeth in the process. To make it worse, her mum told us she was recovering from the same procedures to remove most of her teeth because of almost the same thing. They didn't want to bother the GP as they thought she was just messing about to get out of school. Obligatory, not a doctor. I was sitting in a hostel with an emergency nurse and an emergency doctor that had just found out that while they worked on different continents, they did similar work. We were happily chatting along and this older guy walks in. He overhears that they're in the medical field and comes up to see if he can ask a question. He shows them his leg. That's got large black spots on it everywhere below the knee. Both the nurse and the doctor look at it and immediately go, "You have to go see emergency services. That leg is necrotic. You'll lose the leg if not your life." And the guy goes, "Ha. That's what my doctor back home said too. But the leg feels fine. I'd know if it was dying." You are wrong. Besides, I'm not gonna ruin my vacation by seeking medically treatment, which left me wondering why he asked in the first place. He goes to sit at the bar, and over the course of the evening both the nurse and the doctor leave the table to try to get this guy to understand that he may not have 10 days until he's back home. That he needs to have this looked at now without success. Pretty sure that if that guy made it to a hospital, they asked themselves that question. My cousin is a pathologist assistant and was telling me how she had to dissect a testicle that was 11 pounds. Turns out it was testicular cancer.